Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, on this Christmas Eve, all through the House, not a creature is stirring, nor in the Senate. But the quietness provides a peaceful setting to look back at the past year in politics and what to expect in the new year. Joining us tonight are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Clancy DuBos, political columnist, Gambit newspaper, and Stephanie Grace, political columnist, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. Let's go on over to Errol, and let's talk about COVID and politics.
Yeah, this is something we've seen unfold over the last couple of years. For a chief executive person, they've had to make a lot of tough decisions, and it's been very difficult. But at the same time, if you're a chief executive, this is the way you like to be able to govern, to be in a position where you're the one who just declares and makes the rules. It's a lot, I think of John Bell Edwards' first 2 years as governor, when all he was doing was fighting the legislature with those special sessions. That's the tough part of being a governor. When you get to the point, once COVID comes in and you get to be there with your governors and you say, okay, we're going to have the mask mandate and have the vaccines, and you have to make some unpopular decisions. But the good news is, as I think we'll see, is that at some point you got to make some popular decisions too. And I think it's happened too. And I think with Latoya Cantrell in particular, she was one that was probably a lesser known person among the political leaders, and people would wonder what she'd be like. And some of those early decisions that she needed to make about closing down things. And then last year, when she shut down the parades, those are very unpopular decisions. I think a lot of people understood them. But now, as we saw this past week, she gets to have the glory and say, "Hey, good news, we're having Mardi Gras." So from a political perspective, from political leaders' perspective, this is the way you want to be able to govern.
Errol, like you mentioned with the governor and the mask mandate and, everything that has happened over these past months, he's also had some opposition, though. I mean, the legislature basically was saying, hey, not so fast. We don't think you can do this.
Oh, yeah, we've had opposition all along the way, but still, it's ultimately his call. In the long run, no one's going to remember who the opposition was. No people remember is the outcome. And so I think it's made him strong over the duration of it.
What do you guys think, Clancy or Steph? What do you think about that?
I think the same. I think the same thing applies to, even more so, to Mayor Cantrell, because while the business community was up in arms about her decisions involving not only masking but shutting down and sheltering in place, the population, especially the voting population, was very pleased with what the mayor did, and her numbers remained very strong throughout COVID. I think largely because of the way she was handling COVID. She got good reviews from the press. She got good reviews and good numbers from the voters. She was above 70% approval at one point at the height of COVID. So the people were behind her, and the people also responded. The city was expected to be one of the world's hotspots, and instead we were one of the world's best recovery stories, because we, as they say, flattened the curve very, very quickly and very effectively, and the numbers have stayed down.
And have very high vaccination rates compared to the state, which are still lagging. With John Bell Edwards, it's interesting because this is almost a continuation of the fighting Errol was talking about, which is very partisan. He's, of course, a Democrat. The Republicans control the legislature, and then also throw in Jeff Landry, the Republican Attorney General, who likes to sue the governor and has done so. And so we've had a number of standoffs but the governor has won them all. So really, he did emerge politically stronger. And again, I do think he probably has the, maybe not the noisy minority, but the silent majority with him in terms of being very cautious and being very public health conscious.
Yeah, and public health.
And the governor has actually, the governor has actually kind of walked a tightrope, because he hasn't. The mayor has gone further out because the city is a blue island in the middle of a Red Sea.
Right.
And the governor has been cautious. He has basically said, I'm following the White House guidelines, which is another way of saying, look, you guys are all supporting Donald Trump. How can you criticize me for what his administration recommends?
Right. And of course, now we're finding out
real well during that as well.
We're seeing some of the emails, he was following Deborah Burke specifically, who we're seeing in some of the emails now was really breaking away from the rest of the administration.
If you recall, at the beginning, there was a little bit of a flare-up. Back when we were still getting used to all these in relationships, when she made the decision not to have the Jazz Fest. And the business community, especially in Jefferson Parish, was outraged. Not so much the decision, but because they said, well, he never told us. He should have had the conversation with us. And she was sort of feisty about that. But we thought that was one of the first real standoffs between the mayor's office and the business community.
Well, she doesn't answer to Jefferson Parish, right?
Yeah.
Right, and so public health, I mean, we
Right.
suddenly saw it thrust up there, a major issue, which generally, I mean, public health is always a concern and an issue, but instead of having crime or the economy, we're seeing our politicians having to deal with an overarching public health issue.
Well, and crime in the economy.
And
of
all,
course.
and all of the rest, yeah. So
Yes.
it has certainly been a challenging time for all of us. And so, Stephanie, now that we are where we are right now, and we're also talking about politics, so let's continue on the political vein. We are going to be facing a governor's race in the not too far distant future, and the maneuvering has begun.
2 years is a long time, but it's also not a long time when we have a lame duck governor and a whole lot of people looking at that seat. And of course, as I said, he's a Democrat in a state that tends to vote Republican, so the Republicans really want this back. So then the question is, which Republican? And that's where we're going to see so much maneuvering, I think, in the next 2 years. And it is starting now. It's absolutely starting now. Jeff Landry in the mix. He actually has signaled he's going to run in a lot of ways, one of which is he kind of named a staff member who he would like to see run for his job. So, and, he's put him on the right flank. And then you have Lieutenant Governor Billy Nungesser, who's also really campaigning right now. Put him more in the middle. He's someone who thinks he can probably get some Democratic votes and be the centrist candidate. He has a good relationship with the governor, unlike Jeff Landry. But then there are a whole bunch of other people. John Schroeder, the state treasurer, is looking at it. A couple of legislators. I think it's going to be a big, crowded field. And something that's happened in the past with gubernatorial races, the people we're talking about 2 years out are not necessarily the people who we're going to be talking about in the home stretch. But the maneuvering is absolutely starting. And then the question for Democrats is, it's, the kind of perpetual question, do they try to field their own candidate, strong candidate, or do they try to pick among the Republicans to get the one who is kind of maybe least conservative or most sympathetic to their agenda, or at least will work with them? So we're going to be seeing a lot of maneuvering on that front, too.
So we're seeing the maneuvering right now. When are we going to really
I'm
start
hearing
seeing...
that.
Okay, go ahead, Clance. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm hearing that John Schroeder is going to make a major announcement
Interesting.
pretty early on, probably by February 1st. And he's if you're a fan of Martin Wine Cellar like I am, I eat lunch there a couple of days a week. You can almost always find John Schroeder. Yeah, shameless plug. But anyway,
At which one?
You can almost find John Schroeder at the Metairie Martin Wine Cellar on Fridays and often on Tuesdays. He seems to have his meetings there.
Okay.
And he's a regular. And you'll see him talking to big money people. And he's raised a lot of money, and he's continuing to raise money. If he runs, he will position himself as the Southeast Louisiana candidate. When you have a big field, as the Republicans are likely to have, you will see potentially people running not so much from they will run from an ideological standpoint, from their ideological strength, but you will also see people running from their geographic base.
Right.
And Schroeder is not as moderate as Nungesser, but not as outrageously right-wing as Jeff Landry. He's not the grandstander that Landry is. And there may be others. As Stephanie said, you got a handful of legislators who are interested in it with potentially 3 statewide elected officials running for governor. It's going to be very difficult for someone to come out of the legislature. Not impossible, but if you look back at history, other than when Bobby Jindal ran in 2007, when it was understood by everybody, and that was really a post-Katrina election. It was not a normal governor's race. The only exception to the front runner in the early stages not ultimately winning was Kathleen Blanco. And but she made history by being the first woman candidate. But other than that, I go back to the early 1970s. The candidates who are the early front runners don't make it.
Look at
Louisiana,
Mike Foster coming out of the legislature in 1995 up against a number of much better known people.
And so, go ahead, Ian.
I think there's another part of the scenario that you're likely to see most often, and that there is a Democratic front runner who gets into the runoff and then loses in the runoff against a Republican. Now you say, well, yeah, well, how about John Bell Edwards? Well, that was because he got into a runoff against the one guy he could beat, which was Villery. But I think quite often that's what it's going to be. It's going to be the Democrat and Republican. I'm sorry, Vitter.
Okay, let me jump in also to Stephanie right now, because she wanted to mention also some of the influence.
Yeah.
Maybe we don't know their names, maybe we do, influencers.
Well, going forward, Republicans are lining up. It's interesting. There are some influential people who we hear are trying to recruit Bill Cassidy to possibly run for governor, with the idea being that he, based on we're going to talk about him later, but he's someone who could also appeal to people in the middle and Democrats. If you want to talk about influencers who, coming out of this recent election in New Orleans, I have to say, look at the criminal justice community. My goodness, local and national, because Susan Hudson winning for sheriff was, of course, a huge upset against the incumbent Merlin Guzman. She had so much national support from criminal justice groups, the ACLU, groups connected to Mark Zuckerberg, the same sorts of people who backed Jason Williams, who became district attorney last year. And of course, Jason Williams has he's really turning out to be an influential figure, not just kind of winning the DA race, but helping elect like-minded people to the city council, for example. Helena Moreno, there's a group of them that I think kind of has emerged as very powerful. Troy Carter's in there with, and again, they didn't all support exactly the same people. One of the marks of this last election, I think, is that it was a little bit of a free-for-all. You used to have this organization would support this slate and this organization would support this slate. Now we really have, one from column A, one from column B, everybody cutting their own deals. But the people who did very well with endorsements, I would say, are Helena Moreno, Jason Williams, Troy Carter.
All right. And
Less so the mayor.
Clarence, let's go over to you right now. And
historically, Troy Carter. I want to add two quick things. Troy Carter's a major influencer because they captured a citywide. They're big supporters. He and his group, which was Cedric Richmond's group. So I like to say Team Cedric has become Team Troy.
Yeah.
And the one thing they share in common is an absolute dedication to getting involved in local elections. They elected the clerk of criminal district court, Darren Laborde, who is the chief elections officer in New Orleans. And we also didn't talk about any of the Democrats who might run for governor. Senator Gary Smith is one of those. And there's a Democrat running for the U.S. Senate against John Kennedy named Nixon. And if he runs well, he might turn around, because that race is later in 2022. But if he runs well, he might want to turn around and run. He has a resume much like John Bell Edwards, only he actually saw combat. But he's also you got to, as Errol pointed out, John Bell Edwards had the good fortune to get in against a guy who turned out to be very beatable, David Vitter.
Right, and also Senate races tend to be much more ideological than governor races. There's that challenge too.
Okay, Clance, key elections of this year, of 2021. Key elections.
Okay, well, we started off with in the spring, Troy Carter got elected to the congressional seat in District 2. That was held by his ally, Cedric Richmond. And as I pointed out, Team Cedric, which includes attorney Ike Spears and Bosman Blair Butte, talking about local influences. They are influencers along with the congressman. So we used to be Team Cedric, now it's Team Troy. And then as we get into the fall, Stephanie mentioned the sheriff's race. That was in some ways a bigger election than the race for mayor, because it was always understood from day one that LaToya Cantrell would be reelected. We don't want to diminish the fact that she's going to be mayor for 4 more years. That's very important. But TD did not exactly have a difficult outing. She ran against a big field of nobodies, and she got 65% of the vote in a puny turnout. But that still means that she's the mayor for the next 4 years. On the council, quickly on the sheriff's race, a big victory for progressives, and along with Jason Williams and others. So we have a total turnover of 5 seats on the city council. We mentioned Helena Moreno's reelection, Joe Giarrusso's reelection, but among the newcomers, you have some veterans like J.P. Morrell, a veteran state senator who's going to be the new at-large council member, along with his ally, Helena Moreno, and close friend. And then you have some other veterans like Eugene Green, who has run for office a number of times and finally has won, but he's also served in the public arena at a number of posts at the national level, on a congressional staff, and on various boards and commissions. And he was the Mayor Mark Morrell's economic development director. And then Oliver Thomas, who has reemerged. He was on the council staff and then on the council for almost 16 years, was seen as a potential mayor candidate. He's now back on the council in District E, but you also have two rookies now, District B, Leslie Harris, who'd never run for office before, and Freddie King, who served briefly as a councilmanic aide, but he had never run for a major office before. So we have an interesting mix of veterans and rookies on the city council, but the key thing is 5 seats have turned over. And finally, as I briefly mentioned, the clerk of criminal district court, a major race because that person, Darren Laborde, takes office in May, will not only be in charge of all the files and the evidence at criminal district court, but he also will be the city's chief elections officer. That's a big, big job in this climate.
And council, too, they take office in May, all new council members? Is that correct?
No, the council takes office and the mayor takes office in January.
In January.
Now
okay.
we moved that a few years ago. We changed the charter, but because the clerk and the assessor are municipal offices, parochial offices, their terms are set by the state, and so the new assessor will take office later. The clerk will take office in May 2nd, the first Monday in May.
The same assessor, we should say.
Okay.
Clancy, let me bring up
Yes, the same assessor, Errol.
Yeah.
The other Errol.
The other
Yeah.
Errol, yes.
Let me bring up a word that's been kind of gnawing at me, and I just think it needs some discussion. That is the use of the word progressive. I mean, progressive used to mean that, you're just doing a lot of things, and now it's become sort of like an anthem meeting like the far left. But if people don't follow politics that closely, to me it's kind of a loaded phrase. I mean, I heard during the campaign someone was talking about the candidates, and to someone who doesn't follow politics that closely, and they hear, well, candidate A is progressive, candidate B is not progressive. Well, who do you want to vote for? You want to vote for the person that's progressive without knowing what it's meaning. But it just seems to me to be a loaded phrase, and everybody's using it.
Any comment?
Well, I think progressive was brought up because it's as you pointed out, it's a synonym for far left liberal. Progressives make liberals look moderate in some ways, and it depends on the issue, of course. But I would say somebody like AOC is a progressive, whereas somebody like Troy Carter is liberal. And liberal has become a buzzword that the far right and Republicans like to use to beat somebody up. They'll even call each other liberal. But I think as progressive gains more traction and is used more often, people will, the general public will have a clearer understanding of it. But it tends to be somebody, particularly on criminal justice reform and other issues that are championed by the uber liberals. They will see progressive. I think that'll become a cudgel for Republicans as well in the future. But the term is still somewhat new, and maybe that's why it gnaws at you, Errol, because you and I are from a generation that looks at that word a little differently.
Remember, liberals don't call themselves liberals anymore. And Troy Carter,
That's right.
openly embraced the progressive movement.
Okay. Political experts here, loving to talk politics. Let me jump in and move us to the next segment then. Okay. Kennedy and Cassidy. Steph, to you.
Talk about divergent paths this year, huh? I would say, people tend to, John Kennedy gets a lot of play on TV. He says the things, he says the urine and the, Great Dane size whiz up somebody's leg as a political kind of analogy, and people laugh. But who's become an interesting politician this year? Bill Cassidy. And it's because he got himself reelected with support of Donald Trump, and then very quickly kind of made a move, and he's headed in the same direction all year. He was the only Republican in our delegation to very quickly, not immediately, but very quickly acknowledged that Joe Biden's campaign victory was legitimate, treated him as the incoming president, did normal things like invited his nominees from Louisiana to Biden's nominees to his own office, which is what you do as a home state senator, but not when you're fomenting, insurrection. You don't do that. But Bill Cassidy did. He voted, of course, he voted to impeach based on the January 6th assault. He was the only one in our delegation. He's the only one who did not vote to overturn any state results on January 6th. And then he goes and he negotiates this infrastructure deal, this bipartisan infrastructure deal. Again, the only Republican, House or Senate, in our delegation to vote for it. And although a number of Republicans in the Senate did, including Mitch McConnell, so it did get quite a bit of crossover support, but not from John Kennedy, certainly, who called it kind of a big socialist grab bag, waste of money. Louisiana wouldn't get its share. And Bill Cassidy has really been pushing the idea that, that it will. And it will, in part because he was in there negotiating it. So he got money for rural broadband. He got money to harden the electrical grid. We were certainly talking about that after Ida. He got money for flood control and coastal restoration, and really a number of things that are important to the state, in addition to the things that every state needs, new roads, new bridges. So he's really kind of, he's charted his own path. He's got another 5 years before he faces re-election if he does decide to run. The state party has censured him for his impeachment vote. But he seems to not have any regrets, and he seems to really feel like he can be effective in this role, and that's what he wants to do.
Does it seem like he will seek the governorship?
I don't know, but there are people who want him to, and from what I hear, he has not shut them down. So, but it's a long way to go.
A long way to go.
Yes.
That's for sure.
I don't think he's made up his mind yet. I think Cassidy's still mulling it over. He's got options. And I think, as Stephanie pointed out, she used the word influential. He is way more influential than Kennedy. Kennedy has zero input onto anything of substance or consequence, whereas by negotiating the bipartisan infrastructure deal, Cassidy has set himself up as the new John Breaux.
And I have to say, he's also kind of the new
influencer.
The new Mary Landrieu, who is, of course, the Democrat that he beat in 2014, running a very ideological, very partisan campaign, saying she voted with Barack Obama, I won't. But the thing that Mary Landrieu did, and that Cassidy is also doing now, is get in there in the middle and negotiate. You know, you have power if your vote is up for grabs. People have to give you what you want if they want your vote. So that is real power, and that is the power that Mary Landrieu had in the Senate for many years, and that is the power that Bill Cassidy is amassing for himself.
So, Clarence, let's go on now to our final segment here about Louisiana politics as it compares to other states. I mean, is our politics really that more raucous, more colorful than other states, would you say?
The short answer is not anymore.
No.
Let me just add one quick note about Bill Cassidy. I think Bill Cassidy has come home to the guy he used to be and who he really is on the inside. He's letting it. He's saying, this is who I really am, which is, and back to your question, Marcy, about is Louisiana still as I used to say, the crazy aunt or uncle in the attic? No, we used to be that state that everybody else would say, well, you know, that's Louisiana. They're just nuts. And you know, we had lots of national writers come down and love to come to Louisiana. Well, now we're kind of just like every other state, because the national political scene, people everywhere else are now as crazy, if not crazier, than we ever struck people as being. So it's not like we suddenly got saner. It's everybody else went nuts, and they're still nuts. And there are states out there that are far wackier than Louisiana.
Right. And one thing that we have going for us. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Steph.
One thing I think we have going for us on that front is that we don't have a state government that's organized by party, the way Congress is, the way Texas, Florida, all these other states where wacky things are happening. So, you know, we don't have a majority in the legislature. Go ahead.
Yeah, but a big part of that equation, I think why we are not as nuts as everybody else, is we have a Democratic governor in the South. And that's the tempering influence is John Bel Edwards.
So then, I mean, this is one of the things that kind of shows us what the states are.
If Jeff Landry were governor, if Jeff Landry
Texas.
were governor, we'd be crazier than Mississippi, Texas, and Florida combined. He would try to outdo all of them. And that would be a tough fight with Ron DeSantis out there.
I think part of that reputation traces back as far as Huey Long. He kind of created a lot of that legend. There were so many stories about him and Errol in the books, you know, talking about Louisiana as being a banana republic. And so it's been a reputation that's been hard to shake up. You know, you look at some of the governors. I think some of the governors.
Edwin Edwards carried it on.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
Edwin Edwards carried that on.
That's what I was going to say.
And then we had David Duke.
Yeah. I was going to say, we may have shaken it off by now, except for Edwin Edwards, who wasn't crazy. I mean, he was a really smart guy, but he was certainly witty, certainly humorous. Yeah, but he kept it alive.
So, in terms of politics, I mean,
Yes,
so many of us, certainly, I'm sure you folks, you were young people, really, really young. Very, very interested in politics because Louisiana politics was full of so many interesting characters, so many interesting stories. Are we still seeing that?
No, the legislature used to be the source of many, if not most, of our interesting characters, and they're all, they make Dave Treen look like the life of the party. They're all so predictable. Part of what made the colorful characters colorful is they were unpredictable, but they were also very smart politicians. Earl Long was a very cagey guy. Huey Long, Edwin Edwards, they were smart politicians. What we have now is a bunch of robots, especially on the Republican side.
All right. So let's now talk about, to wrap us all up, about who are the emerging leaders that we're going to be seeing in months, years to come. E, let's start with you.
Okay, well, I apologize to my colleagues. There might be some repetition here, but I think J.P. Morrell is one of the real stars emerging out of New Orleans, at the very least, to be the next mayor. And we've already mentioned Helena Moreno, and so I think we have two. And the other person, and I can't think of his name, maybe y'all can, the mayor of Shreveport.
Adrian Perkins.
Adrian, I knew it was Perkins, but he's young and he's with a black man, but he's very excited. And I happened to be there not long after he was elected, and the business community was really, really excited about him. And so he may emerge somebody, if he can develop that base out of there and carry it across into the South, he could be a star.
Steph.
I have
the problem with Perkins is that he's fallen out of favor with the black community up there.
Cedric Richmond really kind of kneecapped him when he ran for Senate.
His influence has actually gone down.
Yeah.
Yes.
Steph?
Yes.
So I have my eye on somebody else. I've talked about Bill Cassidy, have my eye on him going forward. Also in Washington, an oldie but a goodie, Mitch Landrieu has reemerged. Joe Biden appointed him the head of the infrastructure project, so he's going to be giving out a lot of money. And the Biden administration is really having a lot of trouble with its messaging. So people in Washington are looking at Mitch saying he's a fresh face, he's a really good communicator. I think we're going to see a lot of him.
Clance, wrap us up.
Yeah, real quickly, in New Orleans, I think a new face this past election season, Troy Glover. He fell only 58 votes shy of winning a council seat. And looking regionally, outside of Orleans Parish, Tanner McGee, a state rep from south of Houma. His district was really badly battered in Hurricane Ida, but he's the Speaker pro tem in the House and somebody that many people think, and he's not a robot. So I didn't mean to tar everybody in the Republican Party about saying a lot of them are robots. Tanner McGee is a very influential and well-respected legislator, and I think he's somebody we should watch on a statewide level.
Okay, guys, great discussion. Thanks so much for being here. Thank you all for joining us, too. Have a very, very Merry Christmas, and we will see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.